Welcome. This training is part of Project ReFed, an initiative focused on strengthening local food systems. Today, we're discussing how small food producers can market more effectively to expand into wholesale opportunities and build sustainable businesses. Funding for Project ReFed was made possible by a grant/cooperative agreement from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Marketing Service. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the USDA. This presentation and Project ReFed were developed by the Value-Added Sustainable Development Center, a department of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. Project ReFed focuses on job growth and business sustainability in the local food economy. Our goal is to empower farmers, aggregators, and retailers with the tools they need to succeed. We offer business planning across a range of areas for local food producers. This module explores foodborne illness and outbreak history, the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, good agricultural practices, or GAP, and risk prevention techniques, as well as case studies and implementation strategies for produce safety. Food safety is increasingly important due to aging populations, global markets, and evolving microorganisms. Buyers, regulators, and consumers demand higher safety standards. Outbreaks impact marketability, profitability, and public trust. Foodborne illness is a major concern nationwide. There have been multiple produce outbreaks across the country. Bacteria, such as Salmonella and E. coli, viruses, such as norovirus and hepatitis A, and parasites, including Cyclospora, can all contaminate fresh produce. Many can cause illness even in very small doses. Prevention is key. One key caveat is that most of these outbreaks are coming from the industrialized mainstream food system. Even though most of the outbreaks are coming from large-scale agriculture, small farms do need to be aware of the risks. Some varieties of produce have higher risks than other varieties of produce. In particular, leafy greens and sprouts are linked to greater amounts of contamination than other types of produce. Farmers growing leafy greens or sprouts need to be acutely aware of that higher risk profile. Almost any crop could be contaminated, but knowing the risk factors of your own crops can help to make sure you are running your farm and your operations in a responsible manner, good for both your customers and your business. Three types of microorganisms are the primary risk factors in fresh produce: bacteria, including Salmonella and Listeria, viruses, including norovirus and hepatitis A, and parasites are risks that can be minimized by following good agricultural practices. Bacteria can grow very quickly in the right conditions. Farmers should be especially careful when pathogens have a food source, moisture, and warmth. Follow best practices for each crop. Viruses are tiny particles, and they are usually linked to human contamination through contaminated water or human activity. Prevention is very important as viruses can be very stable in the environment. Parasites, such as protozoa or intestinal worms, are usually transmitted through water. It is important to carefully monitor water sources. Produce is often eaten raw. Because produce is frequently not cooked, produce farmers, distributors, and others need to be extremely vigilant about contamination. Once contamination occurs, it's hard to remove. Bruises, natural openings, and rough surfaces can harbor bacteria. Managing risk requires understanding how contamination spreads and implementing safety practices early. Most contamination in produce occurs through human contact, soil, water, animals, buildings, equipment, and tools. Following reasonable guidelines, such as the steps towards produce safety on the slide, will minimize risks from the aforementioned factors. There have been a lot of outbreaks, but the 2006 spinach E. coli outbreak changed the industry. Commodity-specific gaps came into being after that outbreak. Salmonella outbreaks in tomatoes between 2004 and 2009 led to Florida requiring GAP certification for tomato production in the state. In general, regulatory frameworks like FSMA and GAP emerged in response to multiple outbreaks across the U.S. produce industry. To visualize a larger timeline, in 1998, the CDC and FDA noted increasing produce outbreaks. Buyers began to request good agricultural practice certification. All of this led the FDA to develop FSMA, the Food Safety and Modernization Act, in 2015. FSMA is the first major overhaul of food safety laws in decades. It shifts the focus from response to prevention. It applies to the full food system, including small farms and processors. Compliance depends on what you grow and who you sell to. Please note that FSMA is a law. It is not optional. The FSMA produce rule is mandatory for most fresh produce operations. However, some producers are exempt due to sales volume, buyer type, or product category. All growers should understand their obligations and reduce risk accordingly. To relate an anecdote from a previous session, farmers in our session received phone calls from the FDA asking questions about those farms, such as what products they were selling and sales totals to determine if they should be covered under FSMA. This is a good time to say that FSMA guidelines are generally good. Even if farmers are not required to be regulated by FSMA, many of the practices required by FSMA are helpful in maintaining a safe environment and are still useful best practices. This flowchart is from the FDA, not me, and there is a link with the full flowchart on the FDA's website. I would encourage farmers and food producers to look over the flowchart and determine if FSMA applies to your farming operation or if you have an exemption. For example, if your farming operation sells less than $25,000 per year as a 3-year average of produce, then your farming operation is exempt from compliance with the produce rule. The flowchart is a bit busy, but it also does a good job of showing what some common exemptions may be. Again, local food producers should determine if your farming operation has an exemption or if the FSMA produce rule applies to you. First, the FSMA produce rule only applies to produce that is typically consumed raw. Therefore, there is an exemption for rarely consumed raw produce. Examples would be coffee beans, sweet potatoes, and more. Food grains are also exempt, such as buckwheat and oats. Produce that is used for personal or on-farm consumption is exempt. Processing activities that include a kill step are exempt. Please talk to the regulatory authorities about what constitutes a kill step. Some farmers in Southern Illinois are having a challenging time getting the regulatory authorities to approve dehydration as a kill step in the making of spice blends. This is not so important when determining if one has to follow certain safety rules, but it is critically important if that kill step would allow those products to get into retail grocery stores, and the absence of that kill step would preclude those products from being able to be sold in retail grocery stores. Again, farms that are very small and have an average annual value of produce over the previous 3-year period of $25,000 or less are exempt. Note: please contact the appropriate regulatory authority, usually the FDA, for final exemption guidance. Some exemptions to FSMA are qualified. For qualified exemptions, farms have to meet requirements. First, food sales averaging less than $500,000 annually during the last 3 years. Second, sales to qualified end users must exceed sales to all others combined during the previous 3 years. A qualified end user is either the consumer of the food or a restaurant or retail establishment located in the same state or not more than 275 miles away. Farms with the qualified exemption do still need to meet some requirements. Please see the FDA website or contact the FDA for the most up-to-date information and final determination on exemptions. All FSMA produce rule cutoffs are indexed back to 2011 when FSMA was signed into law. The actual values are adjusted for inflation and calculated using a 3-year rolling average. Please check the FDA's website for the latest figures. For example, while the law indicates the baseline value for cutoffs is $25,000, the actual value in 2023 was $33,415. Again, please check the FDA website for the latest and most accurate information. There are some key provisions in the FSMA Produce Safety Rule. These correlate with the primary risk factors for food safety and include agricultural water, soil amendments such as manure and compost, sprouts, domesticated and wild animals, worker training, equipment, tools, and buildings. Every farm is unique, but farmers need to know how to assess the risks on their own farm. Assess potential water risks such as water sources, nearby land use, animal intrusion, and hygiene infrastructure. Monitor practices regularly and update plans based on new risks or changes to your farm layout or practices. Possible sources of contamination could include domestic animals. For example, one farm had an issue with produce contamination. The cause was found to be water runoff from an adjacent property owner with animals, and the source of the contamination was the animals next door. Examining your farm to make sure that you're taking into account the unique characteristics and context of it is important. Good agricultural practices can be summarized as clean soil, clean water, clean hands, and clean surfaces. These basics support food safety throughout your growing and handling process. Even if FSMA may not apply, your buyers might require documentation or third-party audits. These include food safety plans, traceability systems, and sanitation records. Always ask buyers about their specific needs. Agricultural practices are voluntary certifications of food safety on farms. GAP is voluntary, but commonly requested by wholesale buyers. Types include basic GAP, group GAP, harmonized GAP, and more. Choose the certification that matches your market needs. Please ask your buyers what they need and want. it is important to right-size your certifications to your customers. Similarly to FSMA, the content of GAP training can be extremely beneficial to farmers, even if the farm does not require formal GAP certification. Many farmers are already doing many of the things that GAP requires, but more knowledge can only help. Monitoring ensures practices are being followed. Take corrective actions when issues arise, such as fixing sanitation problems, retraining staff, or replacing faulty equipment. Prepare plans in advance and document everything. If a farm is pursuing formal GAP certification, there are likely to be monitoring and documentation requirements. Vigilant monitoring can also help identify issues before they become problems. Have plans for common issues. Some things can be addressed in advance. For example, one could come up with the plan for a spilled portable toilet on a farm with the portable toilet. Staff may need to be retrained during monitoring as issues are discovered. Equipment may need to be replaced as a long-term action. Also, multiple farmers indicated that the photo with the tractor stuck hit too close to home in previous trainings. So even though some things may not have happened on your farm, it's a good idea to plan for them if they do. Keep records as thoroughly as possible in as organized a manner as possible. Keep record keeping simple and easy so it is consistently done. Keep all of your records for at least 2 years. One farmer revealed that the feedback from GAP inspectors was usually that they were doing a good job with best practices, but that there was not sufficient documentation on certain areas. While the inspector was nice about it, making sure everyone at the farm fills out the records they should will make things easier. Ask your customers if they require GAP and which GAP they require. It can be extremely confusing for farmers as there are multiple GAP variations. These include Basic GAP, Group GAP, Produce Safety Alliance GAP, Harmonized GAP, Harmonized GAP Plus. Some GAP certification requires a third-party audit. All GAP is voluntary and is usually driven by the buyer. Therefore, please talk to your buyers and determine which certifications are the right fit. There are lots of great resources available online. Here are links to some good ones. Lots of good research on food safety exists. The Center for Produce Safety at Cornell and the Western Center for Food Safety at the University of California, Davis are great resources. The FDA has a national coordination center and for future regional centers, which are also helpful. Top Fruit in Colorado developed a food safety plan using the Harmonized GAP checklist. While it was challenging, the checklist and editable templates helped guide them through the process and pass their audit. Mountain Roots built a clean, enclosed packhouse to improve food safety and efficiency. By self-financing and assembling it themselves, they created a better work environment and hired additional help. Each farm is unique. Use local resources, listen to your buyers, and meet the legal requirements for your operation. Focus on practices that add value now and support your long-term growth. Make your records serve multiple purposes. Thank you for participating. Special thanks to FoodWorks and Cornell Small Farms Program, as well as others who contributed to this curriculum.